ginger, peach, turmeric, hello dudes, dudettes, duders, and everyone in between, and welcome to How to Do Everything So You Don't Have to, a series where we teach you how to think like a producer. Hey, here's a theory I just made up. The more important a topic is, the more bad information you can find on the internet regarding that topic. And what could be more important to businesses than contracts? Without contracts, businesses are little more than marbles rolling around in a box, banging into each other. Contracts provide structure and understanding so that business deals can move forward. They are the foundation on which long-lasting and sustainable relationships are built. And wouldn't you know it, pretty much every video I've seen on YouTube about contract advice for photographers and videographers has some delightfully terrible advice in it. Sure, there's usually some good stuff in there as well, but the reality is that the information you're getting from the average film and photo YouTuber, regarding contracts at least, is of lower quality than what you could get from ChatGPT. In this video, we'll be counting down the most common bits of bad information I see on YouTube when it comes to contract advice. I'm not going to give you contract advice in this video because, as you will come to understand, that's sort of impossible in this environment, which leads us to myth number 5. Contract advice is possible on YouTube. The biggest problem with getting contract advice on YouTube is that YouTube is a global concern and contracts are local. Contracts function under the jurisdiction in which they're executed, and this has a huge knock-on effect. Different words mean different things in different places. Good advice about a contract executed in one state could be bad advice about a contract executed in another. A perfect example of this is retainer. What does retainer mean? Because it could mean the opposite of what you're being told depending on where you are and where your YouTube mentor is. Some people use the term retainer as a substitute for deposit. Then they tack non-refundable in front of it because you can make a deposit non-refundable. Other people use retainer to mean a trust retainer, which is money the recipient isn't allowed to touch until the project begins. Do you see the problem here? Is a retainer money that is set aside and cannot be touched so that it can be returned to the client if the project goes belly up? Or is it money that belongs to the vendor once it's handed over, meaning that they can spend it freely? If retainer means trust where you're operating and you use it to mean non-refundable deposit, you've opened yourself up to a world of liability. And that's just one example. Every word in your contract means something, and if you're using a word incorrectly, you aren't just failing to protect yourself from liability. You're exposing yourself to more liability than if you didn't have a contract in the first place. In the case of retainer, if you didn't have a contract and didn't use the word incorrectly, then there's ambiguity and something to debate with the client if a conflict goes into arbitration. If you operate where retainer legally means trust retainer and you go ahead and spend money in the trust retainer as if it were a non-refundable deposit, well, you're the one who broke the contract, not the client, which sucks for you because you're the one who drafted the contract, not the client. Retainer isn't the only word I see getting thrown around with inappropriate confidence. Another big one is contractor. Having a contract does not automatically make you a contractor, at least legally speaking. Two people who legally execute a contract are different from a contractor is different from a licensed contractor. You have to understand what these terms mean when you're working and what protections and responsibilities you're entitled to where you're doing business. There's no one YouTube video that can cover all the nuances of all the differences for all markets and all legal terms, which is why there's no such thing as a global lawyer license. So get a lawyer at least to review your contract, if not draft it up from scratch, because you always need a contract, right? Well, myth number 4, always have a contract. You do not always need a contract. This is life experience talking and nothing else. A lot of our work is done under contract. Some of it isn't, and some of it wouldn't have been possible with a contract. What you need is sensitivity to the kinds of client relationships that benefit from a contract and the kinds of relationships that don't. Our best paying clients always require a contract, but that's because there's a lot of risk tied up in the project, and they tend to define the terms of the agreement. That's why they pay so well, so that they can set the parameters of the project. While it's not always the case, it tends to be true that the more money we're making, the less freedom we have on a job. Teams get access to larger budgets because they are able to execute with attention to details. So there will be stricter expectations regarding stylistic choices, production schedules, and deliverables. Of course, the inverse tends to be true as well. The less money involved, the more freedom we have to execute projects as we like. Smaller budgets afford us more flexibility in terms of style, schedule, and deliverables. Honestly, some of the coolest projects we've been involved in were only available to us because we were sensitive to the fact that the client wasn't interested in paperwork. There are some serious caveats to this, though. This tends to only apply to clients with whom we have an ongoing relationship, so I suppose you could argue that there's a social contract going on. Also, we go into contract-free jobs with the assumption that the last one is free. If they stiff us on payment, we can't open any new projects with that client until payment clears. We don't stress about it. We don't threaten legal action. We just move forward knowing that customers return because of the quality of the creative work we do, not the quality of our paperwork. Related to that is the fact that contracts primarily protect you from conflicts with the client. They don't do anything to protect you from yourself. The cold reality regarding business, particularly small business, is that you are the greatest threat to the health of your enterprise. Poor customer service can't be fixed with a contract. Shoddy craftsmanship can't be fixed with a contract. Failure to prepare or maintain the proper tools for the job can't be fixed with a contract. These are the things that build long-term, sustainable business relationships, and there's no string of words that you can write on a piece of paper that will offer more protection to you and your business than excellent customer service, excellent craftsmanship, and a deep understanding and care for the tools that you use to create your art. About that art that you create so carefully and beautifully, it's important that you own it, right? Well, myth number 3, ownership matters. Something huge I see in YouTube videos about contracts is an obsession with who owns the copyright to the images. This seems to fundamentally misunderstand several very important things about the creation of art. First and foremost, at least in America, you own the copyright to the art you create upon creation. You need to register it with the Copyright Office before you can sue someone, but you own the copyright by default. But we are a litigious nation, and it seems to me that the majority of YouTubers who advocate for making explicit who owns the copyright in their contract do so with the belief that they will have to legally protect their creative work in a court of law. Bad news, dude. If you're writing your own contracts, that means that your art isn't worth enough to hire a lawyer. If your art can't afford a lawyer to draft the documents that would protect their copyright, your art absolutely can't afford a lawyer to enforce that copyright. So who cares? More important than that, if you aren't able to derive enough value from your work to afford a lawyer, what kind of value is it going to have to someone who isn't you? Art has very little inherent value in a vacuum. The true value lies in the context that surrounds a piece of creative work. A headshot is only useful for the actor who's in the headshot. It has no value to any other actor. Wedding photos are useful for the family that was celebrating the wedding. An announcement video commissioned by a company launching a new product is only useful for the company launching that product. It's naturally limiting liability in most situations. So, ease off the throttle on the question of who owns the copyright to little Susie's graduation portraits. That's to say nothing of the seismic shift that has happened in how non-bespoke art is created. Stock photos, royalty-free music, B-roll libraries. There were entire industries and careers behind those categories of art until AI pretty much nuked the landscape. If an image you created has such broad applications that it could be used by someone else, then it's such a broad image that AI could replicate it, which really undermines the calories people burn on copyright debates. The value of images has changed drastically in the last decade, and I believe it's short-sighted to tie the value of your business to the end product you create. I believe the value lies in the context that surrounds the art you make. A headshot isn't worth much without an actor to go along with it. The value is derived through the context, not the image. A corporate announcement isn't worth much without a corporation that wants to announce something and customers who are curious. That's value derived through context, not through the piece of art itself. But all that's irrelevant if your contract is null and void because of a breach of contract. Right? Well, it depends. Myth number 2, you understand breaches of contract. Look, man, breaches be crazy. There's a strange assumption I see on amateur contract advice videos that is really dangerous. The assumption is that contracts terminate on breach, or that the author of the contract is protecting themselves with a sentence like, "Should the client be in breach of anything within this contract, the entire contract will become null and void." I imagine that it's possible to write a contract so simple that the entire agreement would terminate on a single breach, but that's more of a thought experiment than something you'll actually see in the course of your career. Also, I'm sure you can find clauses somewhere in Apple or Amazon's user agreement text that has some nuclear code in it to obliterate all user privileges in the event of X, but even in that case, it terminates the user's privileges, not the entire agreement. And it's concerningly common, especially with people who are at the start of their career, to hear things like, "Well, they didn't pay me on time. That puts them in breach of contract, so it doesn't matter if deliveries are late." I don't know what that accent was. Breach of a well-written contract should trigger a pathway to solving the breach, not the nullification of the entire document. And this stuff gets pretty winding pretty quickly. For example, a late payment might typically trigger a surcharge and a withholding of future work until the payment lands. Simple enough, right? Wrong. That sentence is way more complicated than it sounds and requires a lawyer who understands your market and industry to untangle and translate into actionable language. For example, what does withholding mean? Are you withholding deliveries of completed work, or are you withholding work from the project? That is, stopping all progress until the payment lands, which would in turn require you to adjust the schedule of your deliveries. If a client misses a payment, triggering a late fee, and then catches up on the payment and the late fee, are they in breach of the contract? Well, it sounds to me like they adhered to the letter of the agreement, which had provisions baked in for missed payments. Now, if the author of the contract, that is the vendor, stopped working on the project on account of a late payment and missed a deadline, which was not explicitly permitted in the agreement, guess who is in actual breach of the contract? Well, the client missed a payment and then made the payment plus the late fee, meaning that they respected the contract. If the vendor missed a delivery date and there aren't provisions in the contract for doing that, they could be the party liable for damages that result, not the client, which is a shame because the vendor drafted the contract, not the client. And this is just one example. Everything in a contract requires this level of scrutiny and consideration, which leads to the one myth to rule them all, and in the darkness bind them. Myth number 1, you can write a contract despite the fact that you're not a lawyer, and if you are a lawyer, you aren't licensed to operate in the market in which the contract executes. Okay, you can write a contract, you can write a poem, you can write anything you want, but let's be realistic. The contract you write is going to suck and be difficult, if not impossible, to enforce and will likely introduce more liability than it cures. Hypothetical, you're a wedding photographer and the client says they don't want to pay for a second shooter because their nephew has the latest iPhone and he'll be at the wedding. Stupid, right? That's a fundamental misunderstanding of what a wedding photographer does and how a second shooter supports them. Well, guess what? That's how you sound when you say that you don't need a lawyer because you can download a template or query ChatGPT for your contracts. Here's the reality. Unless you're a lawyer licensed to work in your state, you are as good at writing contracts as the bride's nephew with the iPhone is as a second shooter at a wedding. An argument could be made that this nephew is better than no second shooter because at least more pictures are being taken, but I'd argue it's worse. Stopgap solutions create the illusion that a problem is actually taken care of, but until the problem is correctly solved, the problem persists. Can the nephew and his iPhone handle data management, lens swaps, scheduled meal breaks so the primary can be where they need to be when they need to be there? This nephew has solved the singular problem of creating more images during the day, but has created more problems by failing to back up data throughout the day, delaying shots by not prepping the cameras, pulling the primary from key moments because breaks weren't on the primary shooter's schedule. So now you've got a mountain of new problems that exceed the solution offered by the nephew. Lawyers are expensive. If you have to play dress up and write your own contracts until your business is making enough money to hire a lawyer, I get it. Like the nephew with the iPhone, the contracts that freelancers draft tend to be better than nothing at all and might function as a stopgap measure for a short while. The primary benefit of wheeling out a pretend contract is that it usually leads to clients taking the project more seriously, which will benefit the business in the early days. But these handmade, small batch artisanal contracts usually don't bring the scale of protection that the author believes them to bring, and you won't know this until they're stress tested, and they won't be stress tested until there's enough money moving around to justify someone pushing back against the gobbledygook you've written. If there's enough money moving that your client believes they would benefit from litigating against your contract, there should be enough money moving that you are having your contracts written by a real lawyer. The problem with stopgap measures is that they create the illusion of a solution, and it's easy to forget that there was a problem in the first place. And this is on you. You are responsible for your business's problems, not the internet, not ChatGPT, not the clients. It falls on you. There are instances where the author gets lucky and the template they downloaded from God knows where protects them in the market and industry in which they work in the ways they need to be protected. But there are just as many instances where poor wording or incorrect verbiage increases the author's liability and risk when it was meant to reduce it. Increasing your liability and risk is a stupid mistake to make, and you're not stupid, so don't do it. And if you are stupid, hire a lawyer anyway. It's a great way to hide your stupidity from the world. If you are new to the channel, nuke that subscribe button from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. Now let's all turn off YouTube, scrape our pennies together, and hire real lawyers to write real contracts.